I just want to welcome everybody to our second series of In Conversations with Interlink. We are going to get started now, and with that, I'm going to pass it off to Gabor Reich to kick off this session of In Conversations. Gabor, with that, take it away.
Thank you, Martina. Hello and welcome to today's session. Why one size fits all doesn't work. My name is Gabor Reich and I'm from Interlink, and I'm really excited to be moderating our webinar today. At Interlink, we help organizations build networks that are not just fast, but resilient. And our team delivers global IP transit combined with fully automated, always on DDoS protection so customers can stay connected even under pressure. We're seeing a real shift in how organizations think about connectivity, and buyers aren't just shopping for bandwidth anymore. They're buying resilience. That's why at Interlink, we design DDoS protection and mitigation that adapts to each network's unique topology rather than applying a one-size-fits-all model. And we have got two incredible guests joining us to talk about our topic today. Stefan Behte, VP of Cloud and Managed Services at Babiel, and Annika Wickert, Principal Software Engineer in GitHub. Before we unpack the big questions around DDoS protection, let's take a moment to get to know our speakers. Stefan, maybe you can kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Hi. I'm Stefan, and I've been working at Babiel GmbH for about 20 years, and I'm responsible for hosting. So, for example, we host Bundestag.de, Bundesregierung, Bundespresseamt, and some other big federal agencies. So, naturally, as you may know from in the news, we get a lot of DDoS attacks because every time something political happens that certain countries don't like, then of course we get DDoS attacks. So yeah, it's a very relevant topic for me in hosting. But as I've got a VP role in the day-to-day business, and thus often don't have enough time to focus on the technical aspects of DDoS, I've also written a technical book on DDoS in my spare time. So if you're interested in hands-on DDoS mitigation, just go to DDoS-book.com and have a look if you're interested. And with this, I'll pass to Annika.
Everyone, I'm Annika. I'm working in the industry for about 15 years now. I've seen different landscapes. Like first I worked for a B2B SaaS provider, then for a gaming company, then for an IPTV provider. And now I'm at GitHub for like 5 years. I work in the compute and edge domain there, which is basically all the bits and parts we need to deliver GitHub to you. So CDN, load balancing, DDoS protection, all these kinds of things. And because this is not enough, I also, in my free time, do some non-profit work where we also host things for people in need and stuff like this. Like we did a big video conferencing system back in the pandemic, which also, of course, attracted lots of DDoS attacks because schools are always a target, right? So this is about me.
Thank you, Annika. Thank you, Stefan. And thank you both for being here. So IP transit and DDoS protection services are our bread and butter at Interlink, and we like to promote the two together. The industry is moving from simply selling IP transit to delivering an end-to-end protected solution. And that shift is redefining what customers expect from Interlink as a provider. The aim of today's conversation is to unpack that shift and what's driving it, what's changing in the DDoS protection, and why a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't hold up anymore. We will have about 30 minutes of discussion, followed by 10 minutes Q&A session in the end. And if you have any questions at any time, please drop them in the chat, and my colleagues will keep an eye on it and bring them into conversation in the end of the session. Lastly, a quick incentive for sticking around. Everyone attending today will be entered into a draw to win a copy of Stefan's new book, and we will reach out to the winner by the end of the day. So let's start by grounding ourselves in what's happening right now. So over the past year, what trends or changes have you seen in the DDoS landscape, Annika?
A big change is, of course, IoT botnets are growing. They're becoming bigger, and thus layer 7 attacks become more and more of a thing. Also, more abuse of protocols like HTTP2 is a big attack target because it has some protocol things which are easy to attack with relatively low CPU footprint. And then there's also a change that basically BGP speakers are directly attacked with TCP SYN attacks and stuff like this. So there's a shift from UDP attacks to more sophisticated attacks.
Stefan, on your end, what are the biggest misconceptions you still see among customers when it comes to DDoS protection? Attacks keep getting bigger and faster. What's driving that growth? What do you think?
Well, the growth is mostly, I totally agree with Annika. So the growth is mostly driven by growth of botnets. So for example, the new Isuro botnet, I think they found a vulnerability in some cheap routers, and they managed to deploy new firmware that includes their botnet. So this has driven growth a lot, and we've seen attacks of nearly 30 terabits per second now. So yeah, that's what's driving growth right now. And one of the big misconceptions is that you can just have an easy fix, just buy a magic box that's running on-prem and defense against these layer 7 attacks that also Annika just mentioned. So yeah, you have to do way more than that.
Annika, how do those misconceptions shape the way customers approach protection or invest in it? What do you think? How you see it from your perspective?
Mostly what I've seen, as Stefan says, many people believe it's this magic box where you say turn DDoSes off and they are off. But this is sadly not the truth. So you have to know your products. You have to get into what is normal for my product. And the more you understand your own product, the better you can also basically hinder any attackers to get you down. And as he also said, it's basically keep invested in your product. It's not you buy it once, forget about it, and it will work forever. But you have to constantly get updated on how does the landscape change? How does your product change is also important to know, because you could suddenly have weak endpoints where before were very good cacheable and stuff like this. So always keep ahead of things, or try at least to understand your product.
And how do those misconceptions affect how customers approach protection? What do you think?
I mean, it's mostly, as I said, that people are just trying to enable the default WAF rules and say this must be enough for myself. But this is normally not true. Either you are blocking yourself too much. So of course it works, but also your product is now not working anymore in a correct way, or you don't block the actual actors which are bad on your side. Like if you have a search engine, for example, and you leave that widely open, your WAF didn't do anything for you, right?
Do you agree, Stefan? Or is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, it's always best if you have to know the application, basically. So in this example that Annika mentioned, if there's a search function on your website, your WAF can't block access to that if someone puts in just random strings to create load on your backend servers. So I agree with her, of course.
Thank you for your input. So let's get into the heart of today's topic, the idea that one size fits all doesn't work in DDoS protection. So first to Stefan, I would like to ask from you, why doesn't a single off-the-shelf DDoS solution work for every network? What makes each organization's protection strategy so different? What do you think?
Yeah. So it depends a lot on the workload that you have. So for example, if you just buy a magic box that's running on premise in a data center, then maybe you get a lot of traffic on your router that it can't handle. So your uplink is already congested. The magic box can't help you anymore because it just says 100 gigabits, but your uplink also only has 100. Then your connection from the transit provider towards you is already full. So you really need to make sure that you filter as early as possible and that you work together with the transit provider to only get traffic that you actually want to have in your data center on your servers, right? So for example, if you have a web server, why does it need UDP traffic, right? You're not serving any UDP from that, so just filter it early. And so if you buy a simple solution like a DDoS appliance on-prem, you have to think about the whole network. So where's traffic arriving? So if you have different locations, let's say you have 10 locations, and you would need to buy a DDoS appliance for every location, and it costs, let's say, 100,000 euro, that's already a very big invest that you have to take. And you also have to have spare capacity all the time. So maybe it's not enough to have one appliance at each location. Maybe you need two, and which doubles the price, of course. Or you could take down a location, but maybe you don't have good latency in for example, in China anymore, or in the US. So yeah, it's hard. You can't just buy one box and then this magically solves all your problems you have everywhere in your network.
That's actually a very great point, Stefan. It's also something that we see at Interlink, and many networks outgrow traditional appliance-based setups because traffic patterns are constantly evolving. Filtering upstream close to the backbone makes a real difference in performance and cost. And our approach has been to integrate mitigation directly into the IP transit fabric, so protection scales with the network rather than adding extra complexity at every site. So Annika, would you add anything from your experience?
So from my experience, because coming from a gaming company as well, the protocols are very different. So most DDoS protection you buy off the shelf are talking about HTTP and HTTPS protection mostly, or UDP reflection attacks, but none of these actually looks into custom protocols like you often see for game servers, for example. So you have to build something custom to detect patterns in this traffic, if it's actually valid or not valid. Otherwise, most of the off-the-shelf things will just block your traffic because it looks like garbage, but it actually isn't because it's just gaming traffic, so different from what the normal is. So this is actually a very interesting thing where you have applications which are not the norm. HTTP, HTTPS, most WAFs and OWASP rules and whatnot can actually be solved very quickly today, but as long as you have custom things, it becomes very interesting and very hard to implement in a very quick time.
Yeah, that's where things get interesting. Can you share each of your real-world example where one-size-fits-all setup failed, and what was done differently that made the difference? Stefan, maybe?
Yeah, so we had one customer that was not behind DDoS protection yet because they didn't want to pay for it at that time, but then they got detected. So this was in a different part of the network and not in the DDoS protected network area. And then the uplink traffic had some issues. So and also the mitigation box that they were using was too small for this attack. Basically, it couldn't hold that many sessions. So the fix for us was to migrate it from that part of the network that doesn't have the transit protection and the proper scrubbing center mitigation protection to protect it to the different part of the network which has these protections. So this was done during the attack, which added some challenges because then you have to deal with low TTL, with high TTL times and things like that. So, but we managed to do it and keep the site online even during the attack.
Thank you for sharing this real-world issue. We have established that customization matters, right? So, but how do you do it in practice? Stefan, how do you approach tuning and adapting defenses for different customers at Babiel?
Yeah, so as we have some mitigation inline, we baseline all the traffic the customer has. So for example, I already know how much traffic my customer has. And if there's an election, I know beforehand that there will be an election, and I can adjust the volumes of traffic I'm expecting. So I already know my environment very well. And so if there's some anomalies in the traffic pattern, so for example, if on a Tuesday evening I see a lot of traffic which is unusual, I can alert on that anomaly already. Or but for other things, if I know that there will be the election, I'll just adjust the volumes and then it'll be fine and it will not trigger an automatic mitigation. Yeah, because we don't want to create any issues for the real visiting people.
Sure. Annika, what lessons have you learned from coordinating internal and external defense during incidents, especially under pressure? I'm curious to know more about that.
So one thing is actually don't coordinate these things only in incidents, but do a game day before with all parties, so you know who to contact, because sometimes it can happen your actual wiki, Confluence, whatever you're using is down as well, so you don't know who to call anymore because everything is down. So be prepared for such scenarios and be prepared on who to contact, as I said, and then set up a real-time bridge is most of the times the most important thing as well. So keep in touch with people when you're actually under attack and try to mitigate those things, because it doesn't help if you have to do a ticket ping pong during such high and intense times. So keep in touch, be prepared, know your product again, because otherwise things also get complicated when you don't know what you actually expect and can't tell your upstream provider what to block because you don't know what your application is doing and stuff like this. So this is actually very important. Coordinate with the external parties, do a game day before, and know your persons you talk to.
Thank you. I think it's a very exciting part to balance out between the automation and human decision making during an attack. I'm wondering, how do you do it, Stefan, at Babiel? So that's, I think, a very interesting question. How
Yeah.
does it work at your company?
Yeah, so of course we have a lot of automatic mitigations that get enabled when we see the anomalies that are unexpected, of course. So for example, if you have a high traffic website, we could automatically trigger a mitigation that does not require user interaction. For example, some kind of proof of work that is done before, so that we actually know a browser is accessing the website. But we don't want the user to have to fill out a CAPTCHA, right? We can stagger this up. So the first one would be proof of work, and then maybe you have the usual button click thing, or maybe at the end you have a CAPTCHA. It depends. But the CAPTCHA has some severe issues. So what's happening if you're visually impaired, or then you would have to add an audio CAPTCHA, and these are sometimes easier to automatically solve by an attacker and things like that. So it's best to start with a method that doesn't require much user interaction, and from there ramp it up if it's required only.
Thank you. Annika, what are your thoughts on this?
Basically, automatic detection is key for all the things, and keep the noise for the actual people who need to work on an incident or when the mitigation fails to auto-detect stuff low, because you don't want to be paged or notified for anything which is auto-mitigated. That's a very important part of the whole game, because otherwise attacks aren't taken seriously anymore and people get easily annoyed, because why would I take or get paged at 3 a.m. for, yeah, we scrubbed everything. So automation is key, and only notify if really something goes south. Yeah.
Agreed. And what lessons have you learned from coordinating internal and external defenses during the incident, especially under pressure? We discussed before, but in relation to this specific part, what do you think about that?
So it's also important that basically you have APIs also for the external scrubbers. So you can actually just tell them automatically, we want this to be gone from our network. So you don't have to call someone if this is an automatic event, right? Because nobody wants to join, also from the vendor, nobody wants to join a bridge at 3 a.m. for something which an API could do, right? So only reserve the actual human interaction to things where things really get complicated, and everything else should be automated in that context.
Cool. Gotcha. Stefan, how critical is visibility and communication, both internal and with providers, in achieving fast and effective mitigation?
Yeah, in my point of view, it's the most important thing that you need, because if you're not seeing what's happening in your network, how are you going to defend it and choose the right measures against it, right? So yeah, if you also don't have visibility into your application, it's really hard to see what's going on. So maybe it's an attack against the search function we mentioned earlier, that causes high backend load with very few requests. Maybe these requests are just very complicated, right? that's an issue that can happen. And if you don't have visibility, you have no chance of defending really. And communication with providers is of course very important, because sometimes if they mitigate an attack for you, they really need to know what they're doing, and you have to have a good and fast back and forth, or maybe hop on a call, so that it's mitigated correctly and you don't have accidental collateral damage on your website, right? I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you. Great insights. Thank you both. I would love to look ahead to what emerging threats and patterns do you expect to see still in 2025, or looking ahead 2026? Annika?
I think what we will see more is AI-generated attacks from pull requests or commits to open source projects. Like, people are fixing things left and right, of course, in every open source project, and it gets easier and easier to keep track of those commits and try to write something, even automated via AI, which tries to exploit those commits when you see them. And this is actually I think, an emerging thing. So you can react faster to CVEs. You can actually faster have a proof of concept on how to exploit these kinds of things and how to make the attacks more massive. But also, of course, the IoT botnets and the botnets are massively increasing in size. So this is also a big threat. And we are seeing new record DDoSes. Google, I think, reported lately a very record DDoS. And this is, just the sheer number of things. I've seen some in the past in the gaming company. We had the issue that actually our IP tables grew so big that the servers couldn't parse the IP tables anymore because it was just so many attacker IPs back in the time. So this could be another thing, is how to mitigate attacks with those sizes of botnets.
Stefan, you unmuted yourself. Do
Yeah,
you have
sorry.
anything to add?
Yeah, I agree, and that's what we're seeing. So sometimes you get attacks from botnets that have 100,000 bots, and if you just fill them into some list, they can grow very large. And also with these very big attacks that can just do immense amounts of HTTP requests per second. So if we just cycle again back to the search function, it may be enough if just one IP does the request every minute, right? Because if you have 100,000 and you split this down to the minute, it's just a very low frequency per IP that's being done. So this also makes it harder to mitigate attacks. For example, in this attack, you would have to enable a proof of work for the whole website, which would possibly impact some visitors too, right? Yeah, and the important thing, what's happening is that HTTP2 and HTTP3 attacks are happening more and more. Someone finds some issue with that. Maybe they also use AI to look into specific web server implementations or load balancing implementations to find an issue there. And I agree that the lead times will be shorter in the future.
Yeah, thank you. You just mentioned, Stefan, AI, and I think there is no meetings, webinars, discussions nowadays at our industry without mentioning AI. And this is what I would like to discuss with you both in the next part. So at Interlink, we have started to see the same thing, attacks growing, not just in volume, but also in sophistication. It's no longer just about absorbing traffic. It's about understanding intent and reacting dynamically. And that brings me to my question about AI. Do you think that AI will be used on both sides, on attackers and defenders in the near future? Stefan?
Yeah, totally. Because right now you can also use machine learning already. Some products have implemented it for quite a while. For example, if you have a ZM product and things like that. So but you really have to know what's going on with your website. So if you don't feed in the information to that AI, for example, like I mentioned the election example, then suddenly, wow, there's 10 times more people than usual on the website. This seems to be a DDoS attack. So you have to have a way of inputting information manually into that thing and to basically modify the response for certain times maybe, right? And so that's for the defending side, and also for the attacking side. It will probably be easier to kind of let Claude AI write a proof of concept for a new vulnerability that was released. So, for example, sometimes now when there's a new vulnerability, they won't add proof of concept code like people used to, because they don't really want other people to exploit it in the wild. But maybe with these descriptions on how the attack works, AI can create a proof of concept that actually does work.
Thank you, Annika. What do you think? Is AI more useful for the attackers or for the defenders? Who is going to be benefit more?
I think it's actually both sides will benefit a lot, because it also, for example, helps me to get from a CVE to a proof of concept attack to target my own product very quickly, so I can see what maybe will happen in the next few days, hours. So I can actually spin up my countermeasures already. Or I can also search a huge amount of logs in a very short time to see if something is changing, and feed it with extra information like, does this look like a new HTTP thing? Do we see more of this frame and stuff like this, which before was very hard to actually even find in the sheer volume of some of the logs. So it can definitely help. But I think the battle becomes now even more harder, let's say it like this, because it's just even faster. You get the proof of concepts faster, but you also can maybe defend faster because you see stuff growing already in your logs and you can alert on this. But as Stefan said, you also need to be very careful that your AI is not preventing your game from launching, or your special GitHub universe, for example, because new products get up there and stuff like this, and it detects this as, oh my God, we never had traffic to this endpoint before, so it must be bad, right? So you have to really fine tune and keep an eye on what it's doing. So it's mostly like, it's more used for monitoring and prediction. I wouldn't let it auto handle most of the things at some time, but actually trigger the humans. This looks unusual, report it to me, and then we can look deeper into this.
Thank you. Stefan, based on what we just discussed, how do you think protection strategies will need to evolve to keep up with that, with what we just discussed and we predict to happen in the near future?
Yeah. So, of course, you need to partner with a transit provider that's also currently growing and that does good capacity planning, because bandwidth is increasing all the time and they really need to keep up with that. And also, it's very important to have kind of an interface to the provider so you can automatically feed some information to them on what you want to block. So, for example, a very good solution for this would be FlowSpec, of course. And that's really what's needed nowadays.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree with you more. Lastly, what advice would you give to organizations that are building or refining their data protection strategy right now, Annika?
One advice is get into contact with your upstreams early so that you are prepared, and ask them if they can provide APIs, if they can take BGP flow spec things or whatnot. So get them involved early so that you don't do it in a rush when it actually is happening. So be prepared early. DDoS will happen to everyone at some point. So there is no company which will be spared, is my prediction, because it's just so cheap these days to get attacked. And also know your applications. What are the most expensive CPU-wise or bandwidth-wise calls in your application? And where do I need to protect my application the most? Can I degrade my application? For example, if something happens, can I just disable the search path? Because nobody needs the search path and everything else should just work. So know your application, have fallbacks included into your application, and talk to your upstreams is my advice.
Yeah, and I would like to add that you really have to test your stuff. So maybe have a very good protection plan. You know your weak points, or you think you know your weak points. you have implemented some protection, but at some point it might fail, or it maybe doesn't work anymore because the application changed, the requirements changed, there's a new DDoS attack you haven't tested before. So I would really advise you to test it. Just send 10 gigabits of traffic to your own site and see what's happening, what's going on. Are there already some weak points? Then you really have some stuff you need to look into it. And from there, just scale it up a little more, maybe do a flood of 100 gigabits for a few minutes and see what's working, right? Of course, you have to take care of not impacting some other providers on the way, or you have to talk to your transit provider first before you do something like that. But I really advise everyone to test not only the network, but also the application, of course.
Oh, so many useful information, and there is so much to talk more about these topics, but I think we need to wrap it up soon, as we need to also allow some time for the questions we may got from the audience. Martina?
Yeah, we got a bunch of questions. So we'll start with this one. What's one thing you wish more customers understood before an attack happens? You want to take that, Stefan or Annika?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Sure. What's one thing you wish more customers understood before an attack happens?
Okay. So yeah, really the visibility part, I would say, and the whole preparedness thing. So you can usually in the middle of an attack, it's really hard to get it mitigated if you haven't done your homework before. So if the attack is happening and you call someone to just fix it for you, you also have to take care, like how are your origin protections? How is that going to work? Because the attacker already knows your real IP address. And if you just put Cloudflare in front of you, well, they can still attack your addresses. Even if you put on some filters to only allow Cloudflare, traffic will still get routed towards you, right? So I would say that's an important thing that I wish more people understood.
Thank you. I have a second question. Maybe Annika, you can take this one. How do you see the balance between cloud-based versus on-prem mitigation evolving?
I mean, basically, I think both is important. So you need to do some of the stuff on your own equipment because you can't just outsource all of the mitigations because, as Stefan said, it could be that somebody knows your origin IP, so you also need to be protected there. But the cloud-based solution can actually absorb way more traffic in way more regions and stuff like this. So I would say you need both in some way or shape or form.
Great.
Thank you. Martina, 1 second, because I just got another question through LinkedIn.
Sure.
If I can pull this in. What's one misconception about DDoS you would love to debunk for good? Maybe that's a question for you, Annika.
I mean, basically, it's what we told many times in this talk already. Is it's not you buy it and you forget about DDoSes. You need to be ahead of the game and you need to think about your application, keep track of your application and understand your application, and always invest in DDoS mitigation because the landscapes change. So it's not you buy one thing and it will work forever. You need to be ahead of the game, and talk to people is also very good advice.
Sure. I'm pretty sure that we have a lot questions. We received a lot of questions from the audience. We will try to work on answering all of them with the help of our experts. So bear with us, but I think we really need to wrap it up. And thank you very much for attending. This is the end of today's session. And a huge thank you to Annika and Stefan for sharing your insights, and thanks to all of you joining us and contributing your questions. I think if there is one takeaway from today, it's that resilience isn't something you buy off the shelf. and it's something you build, and that's what we aim for at Inter.link, helping organizations design connectivity that fits their reality from transit to protection. And one very important last detail to mention, don't forget that one lucky attendee will receive a copy of Stefan's new book about DDoS protection. And you will hear from us by the end of the day. And this session was part of our Interlinks in Conversation digital sessions, and we will have more coming up in November and beyond. So keep an eye on your inbox for upcoming topics. Follow us on LinkedIn. And thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and weekend onwards.